I'm all yours. The whisper came out rough,
Come over
almost
here.
animalistic. Come over here. Sarah froze. For one
Come over here.
terrifying second, she forgot to breathe. Min-ho's hand shot out and caught her wrist before she could reach the syringe lying on the floor. The force pulled her against him until their chests collided. His body was burning with heat, still trembling from the seizure that had thrown him onto the bedroom floor only moments earlier. Then his hand rose, not to strike her, not to hurt her. It stopped around her throat. His fingers rested there, firm enough to keep her still but never tightening. His dark eyes searched hers as though he couldn't tell whether she was real or another hallucination. "You hear that?" he whispered. His gaze dropped between them. "Your heart." She could hear it too. It was pounding so hard she was sure he could feel every beat through the thin fabric between them. "Good." His thumb brushed lightly across her jaw. "It's beating for me." Sarah ripped herself free and stumbled back, her spine hitting the edge of the dresser hard enough to bruise. Somewhere in the room, a monitor she'd clipped to his wrist hours earlier was still beeping in a rhythm too fast to be safe, and some clinical part of her registered it even as the rest of her mind refused to move. "Don't ever touch me like that again." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The violent confusion slowly disappeared from Min-ho's eyes. His breathing steadied. He looked at his own hand, then back at her, as though he couldn't remember what it had just done. "Like what?" he asked quietly. "Like I belong to you." Without another word, Sarah picked up the syringe from the floor and walked straight back to him. Her hands did not shake, though everything else in her did. She knelt beside him with the same calm professionalism she always had and pushed the needle into his arm. "I'm your doctor," she said evenly. "Nothing more, nothing less. The day you forget that, I'm gone." Silence settled between them as the medication began to work. His breathing slowed. His trembling eased. He never looked away from her. "You're right," he finally said. She zipped up her medical bag. "You're not mine." She turned toward the door, then his voice stopped her. "But you will be." If that line just made your stomach drop, you're exactly where you need to be. Hit that like button now, because this story is about to earn every second of your attention. She didn't turn back around. She made herself walk the rest of the way to the door, made herself open it, made herself step into the hallway before she allowed her hands to shake the way they wanted to. Two of his men stood posted outside, both pretending not to have heard anything through the reinforced walls. Neither met her eyes. She understood in that moment that this was simply how the house worked. Everyone heard everything, and everyone agreed to know nothing. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat at the small desk in the guest wing, a room too large for one person, running his blood work for the second time by candle glow of a laptop screen. Potassium erratic, cortisol spiking without cause. A seizure pattern that didn't match epilepsy, didn't match a tumor, didn't match anything in 6 years of practice. She told herself it was a calibration error. The machine was new to the house, unfamiliar, possibly miscalibrated in transport. She reran the sample through a second cartridge just to be sure, already composing the explanation she'd give herself in the morning: equipment fault, nothing more. The second result came back worse than the first. Not different. Worse. The same erratic signature, sharper this time, as though whatever was moving through his blood had grown bolder overnight. She didn't say anything to anyone. Not yet. A doctor who cried poison on her 3rd week in a Mafia boss's house, based on 2 contradictory blood panels and an unfamiliar machine, was a doctor who'd be escorted off the property by morning. Assuming she was escorted anywhere at all. and not simply disappeared the way she suspected people disappeared from houses like this one when they became inconvenient. She needed a third result. A clean one off-site, somewhere no one in this house could touch it. That would take time she wasn't sure she had. A soft knock came at her door near 2. 3 even taps, unhurried, not his rhythm. MS. Cho, the housekeeper who had barely spoken 10 words to Sarah in 3 weeks, stood in the hall with a fresh pot of tea and an expression that wasn't quite sympathy. "You should sleep." "I know." "You won't." "I know that too." Ms. Cho studied her a moment longer than necessary, set the tray down without another word, and left. It was such a small kindness Sarah almost didn't register it as one, until she was alone again, staring at the closed door, wondering how many people in this house watched everything and said nothing, and which of them watched for reasons that had nothing to do with kindness at all. A second knock came just before dawn, faster, less measured. The chief lieutenant, Park Jae-hoon, stood in the hallway, jaw tight, dressed like a man who hadn't been to bed either. "He asked for you." "It's 4 in the morning." He didn't ask twice. She followed him down a corridor she hadn't seen before, past a wall of security monitors flickering with silent footage of empty rooms and empty gardens. Jae-hoon said nothing the entire walk, though she caught him glancing at her twice, an assessment she couldn't name yet. It would be weeks before she understood what she'd seen in his face that morning. Not suspicion of her, but the particular exhaustion of a man carrying a weight he hadn't yet decided whether to put down. Min-ho stood at the window, fully dressed. No trace of the man who'd been shaking on his bedroom floor hours earlier. The transformation unsettled her more than the seizure had. "You wanted to see me. I want you to stop treating this like a mystery you're solving alone." "It's my job to solve it alone." "Not anymore." He faced her, and for the first time she saw something in his expression that didn't belong to a man who ran an empire with a single sentence. Fear, not of dying, of not being believed. "Someone in this house wants me dead," he said, "and I think you already suspect that too." She hadn't known, not with certainty. Hearing him say it out loud gave shape to a fear she'd been circling for 2 weeks. "If that's true," she said carefully, "then everyone with access to your medication is a suspect, including me." "I know." "You still let me inject you tonight." "I know that too." "Why let me stay this close?" "Because whoever is doing this is patient," he said. "They wouldn't risk someone reckless enough to be caught in the first 3 weeks. Whoever it is has been here longer than you, trusted longer than you." He stepped closer, deliberate, not threatening. "Which means, for now, you're the only person in this house I can't afford to suspect." It should have felt like relief. It felt like something heavier. That evening, he summoned her to a room she'd never been allowed into, a long table, 6 men seated along it, ledgers and shipping manifests spread across the wood like a war map. Sarah was told to stand at the back and observe nothing, say nothing. She'd never seen him like this. A man from the Incheon docks was 3 minutes late delivering a number Min-ho had asked for. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stopped speaking mid-sentence and looked at the man, and the room went so still Sarah could hear the air conditioning cycle on. The man's hands started shaking before he even opened his mouth to apologize. "I don't repeat requests," Min-ho said quietly. "I remember who made me." Nobody breathed until he moved on to the next item. A councilman's aide called midway through, a man whose district Min-ho's shipping routes ran straight through, and Jae-hoon took the call in the corner, voice pitched low and careful, the particular tone of a man translating threats into diplomacy. When Jae-hoon hung up, he simply nodded at Min-ho. No further explanation needed. Whatever had been asked for, whatever had been promised, everyone in the room understood it had already been decided 3 sentences ago. Sarah realized, watching from the back wall, that she'd spent 3 weeks treating the tremors in this man's hands without once understanding what those hands controlled. It recalibrated something in her, watching him now not fear exactly, but a clearer sense of the size of the thing she'd agreed to hold together. Afterward, alone in the corridor, Jae-hoon caught her arm gently, nothing like the boss he served. "You saw that and you're still here," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "Should I not be?" Most people who see that room decide the disease might be a mercy. He studied her for a moment. "You didn't flinch." "I don't scare easily." "That's not always a virtue in this house, doctor." He let go of her arm and walked away before she could ask what he meant by it. She filed the exchange away with all the others she'd started collecting since her first week, small, unexplained weights she couldn't yet place. By morning, the investigation had a shape, and a wall standing squarely in the middle of it. She requested the medication delivery logs for the last 2 months. What came back was incomplete, 3 weeks missing entirely. The gap explained by a system migration Jae-hoon's security team swore had happened on schedule. Nothing suspicious, just bad timing. Sarah didn't believe in bad timing anymore. She cross-referenced staff rotations against the erratic dosing windows instead, working at a folding table in the corner of the security office, while Jae-hoon's men filed in and out with boxes they clearly resented handing to an outsider. She eliminated 3 kitchen staff by lunchtime rotation schedules put them off-site during the critical windows. She eliminated a supplier by early afternoon, the timeline too clean to explain the pattern. Then she found him. A junior physician's assistant, hired 8 months ago, whose badge had logged access to the medication cabinet during 2 of the 3 windows that mattered. Sarah brought the name to Jae-hoon with more certainty than she'd felt about anything in this house, and for 1 entire day, she believed the mystery was over. It wasn't. The assistant broke down in tears under questioning, produced hospital records proving he'd been at his dying mother's bedside during the 2nd window, a record Jae-hoon's men verified within the hour. He was innocent, terrified, but innocent. Sarah had nearly ended a grieving man's life over a badge log that turned out to belong to someone who'd borrowed his credentials without asking. She apologized to him personally. He didn't accept it easily, and she didn't blame him. The dead end left her with something worse than no suspect, the knowledge that whoever was doing this had access to more than medication. They had access to badge logs, to records, to exactly the kind of details that would send an outsider chasing an innocent man for a full day while the real trail went cold. Every entry point led back to one uncomfortable fact. The chemical signature in his blood matched a compound rarely used outside specialized neurology research, the kind only a handful of doctors in the country would recognize on sight, doctors like her mentor. She dismissed the thought before it finished forming. Dr. Han had trained her, vouched for her, recommended her for this exact position when 3 other physicians turned it down out of fear. The idea that he could be involved felt less like suspicion and more like a betrayal of her own judgment. She didn't mention it to Min-ho. She told herself it wasn't worth raising yet. Some part of her already knew that was a lie. That night she checked on him at midnight, ostensibly to record vitals, and found him awake, staring at the ceiling, one hand resting over the spot on his arm where the needle had gone in hours earlier, as if he could still feel it. "You should be resting. I don't like closing my eyes in a house I can't trust. You built this house. I built it to keep enemies out." His voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "I didn't think about what happens when the danger is already inside." She pulled the chair from the corner closer to the bed and sat, not touching him, not speaking, just present in a way that had nothing to do with medicine. She stayed longer than she needed to that night. Neither of them mentioned it the next morning. But the following evening, she noticed her coffee had gone cold on the desk while she worked, and when she looked up, a fresh cup had already replaced it, set down without a word, without him waiting to be thanked. She didn't see him do it. She never did. That somehow made it matter more. 3 days later, Min-ho announced they were leaving the city. He didn't explain the decision. He rarely explained anything. But Jae-hoon's face when he heard the destination told Sarah this wasn't a normal relocation. She watched the two men speak in low voices near the security office, watched Jae-hoon's jaw work like he wanted to argue and knew better, watched him finally nod and walk away without another word. "What was that about?" she asked Min-ho afterward. "He doesn't like the location." "Why not?" "Because almost no one alive knows it exists, and he's uneasy that I'm choosing to trust a place over a person." His mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "He's not wrong to be uneasy. I've never taken anyone there, not even him." She should have found comfort in that. Instead, she filed it away as one more thing that didn't quite add up. A lieutenant who knew every route in and out of the empire, uneasy about the one place he didn't. The route to Tokyo wasn't as simple as it should have been. A rival syndicate, the Yamaguchi-affiliated interests Min-ho's organization, had been quietly boxing out of the Busan shipping lanes for 18 months, had eyes on 3 of his usual travel patterns. Jae-hoon rerouted the convoy twice before they'd even reached the airport, swapping vehicles in an underground garage that didn't appear on any map Sarah had seen. Nobody explained why. Nobody needed to. She was starting to understand that in this world, the absence of explanation was its own kind of mercy. At the gate, a customs official recognized Min-ho's private security detail and personally walked their party through a side corridor without a single word exchanged. Not fear exactly, more like the reflexive deference of a man who'd long ago decided which battles were worth having. Min-ho didn't acknowledge it. He never did. Power that had to announce itself, she was learning, wasn't real power at all. 2 days later, Tokyo. The medical conference hotel was glass and steel, all soft lighting and quiet luxury. Sarah was here to present research on neurodegenerative treatment protocols, a professional trip, entirely separate from Seoul, entirely separate from him. Or it was supposed to be. A knock at her hotel room door. She checked the peephole and her stomach dropped. Kang Min-ho. No security, no entourage. Just him in a dark coat, looking like he didn't belong in this soft, ordinary hallway. "You didn't tell me you were coming." "I needed to see you. Away from Seoul, away from everything." He stepped inside without being invited, then stopped himself, an unusual hesitation for a man who took up space like he owned the air in every room. "In Tokyo, I'm not the boss. You're not the doctor. We're just 2 people. That's dangerous." "Yes, it is." He held something out to her, small, simply wrapped, nothing that matched his usual scale of power and money. A gift chosen by a man, not a boss. She took it. Didn't open it yet. The conference gala that night should have been the easiest room she'd stood in for weeks. It was, instead, the most dangerous. Halfway through the evening, Sarah caught the first tremor starting in Min-ho's right hand from across the ballroom, the particular double-beat rhythm she'd learned to recognize in her sleep. He was mid-conversation with two Japanese business executives and a man she recognized from a financial news segment months earlier, all of them deferring to him with the practiced ease of people who understood exactly how much weight his name carried in a room like this. He could not be seen to falter here, not in front of these men. She crossed the ballroom without hurrying, intercepted a passing waiter's tray, and arrived at Min-ho's side with two champagne flutes, as though she'd meant to join the conversation all along. "You promised me a dance an hour ago," she said lightly, looping her arm through his, and beneath the table's edge of his sleeve, her fingers found his pulse point and pressed, hard, a technique she'd read about in a paper years ago and never expected to use outside a hospital bed. It wasn't a cure. It bought 30 seconds, enough to walk him toward the terrace doors without a single person in that ballroom suspecting anything beyond a man besotted with his date. Once they were alone on the terrace, his knees nearly buckled, and she caught his full weight against her, guiding him down onto a stone bench half hidden by a hedge. Syringe already in hand from the small case she'd learned to carry against every instinct that said a gala didn't require one. "How did you know?" he managed, teeth gritted against the tremor. "I've been watching your hands for 3 weeks. I know them better than you do." He didn't say anything else until the medication took hold, until his breathing evened, until the danger of collapsing in front of men who would remember it for the rest of his career had fully passed. Then he looked at her with something she hadn't seen from him before, not gratitude exactly. Something closer to disbelief that anyone had ever managed to protect him without being asked. "Nobody has ever done that for me," he said. "Not once. Not before you." Later, in the hotel hallway, rain had started against the windows at the corridor's end, and Sarah was halfway to her room when Min-ho stepped out of the shadow of the stairwell and stopped her without a word. Dr. Yamada, a colleague from dinner, charming in the easy way of a man who'd never once doubted himself, had spent 20 minutes at Sarah's elbow during the reception, laughing at something, touching her arm lightly, the way colleagues do. Across the room, Min-ho had watched with the stillness she now recognized as his most dangerous state. He backed her gently against the corridor wall, not violently, but completely, one hand braced beside her head, rain streaking the window glass behind him. "Who was he?" "It's a colleague. Why do you care?" "Because I saw how he looked at you, and I don't like it." "You don't own me." "I know, but I want to." The honesty of it startled them both. "You need to hear this, and I need you to actually listen," she said, holding his gaze, refusing to be the one who looked away first. "I am not a possession you acquire, Min-ho. I am not territory. If you want to be near me, you earn that, every single day, not by cornering me in hallways." He dropped his hand from the wall, stepped back, the closest thing to surrender she'd seen from him yet. "Understood." Later that night, another knock. This time he carried a folder. She let him in. Something in his expression told her this wasn't about jealousy anymore. "I need you to see this." Medical records. A name that wasn't his brother's. Sarah's eyes moved across the pages, understanding building with each line. He didn't die from the disease. He killed himself. Couldn't handle the paralysis, the loss of control. His voice was steady. His eyes were wet. "That's why I refused treatment for so long. I was terrified of becoming him." He looked at her, nothing possessive or cold left in his expression, just a man laid bare. "But you make me want to fight." Sarah closed the folder gently, put her hand on his arm. "Then fight, but fight for yourself, not just to prove you're not him. He nodded slowly, like he was hearing something he'd needed for years. Quick pause before we go further. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who need a good slow burn romance in their life. Okay, back to Seoul's most dangerous man and the war closing in around him. Back in Seoul. His office, dark wood, floor-to-ceiling windows over the city he controlled. Sarah was counting the seconds between tremors in his hands when the door opened without a knock. Jae-hoon entered fast, phone still in hand. "Boss, we have a situation. The Yamaguchi clan is moving on Busan." Min-ho didn't let go of Sarah's hands. "Handle it." "Sir, this is." "I said handle it. She's more important." Jae-hoon's eyes flicked between them, disbelief, then something colder settling into place. He left without another word, and this time Sarah noticed what she hadn't the first time. The way his hand tightened on his phone as he walked out, the particular quiet of a man recalculating something. "You just chose me over your empire," she said, once they were alone. "Yes. Do you understand what that could cost you? I understand what it costs me every day that I don't." What neither of them saw was Jae-hoon, 3 floors down, standing at a window with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a voice too low for anyone to overhear, agreeing to a meeting he had no intention of mentioning to his boss. His home that night. Sarah found him in his study, a room she'd never been invited into before. Old photographs spread across the desk. A younger Min-ho, softer around the eyes, arms slung around a laughing young man who shared his face. "I wasn't always like this. Before he died, I was kind, generous. He was the strong one. I was the soft one." He picked up a photo, didn't look away from it. "When he died, I had to become him, ruthless, cold, feared, because if I didn't, everyone I loved would die too." He looked up. "But you make me remember who I was before." Sarah crossed the room, reached up and straightened his collar without thinking about it, an unconscious, domestic gesture that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with 3 weeks of watching him hold himself together for everyone but her. He went still under her hands, watching her face instead of the photo now. "That person isn't gone, Min-ho," she said. "You just buried him under a lot of rubble." Hospital, daylight. Sarah reviewed Min-ho's latest scans on a light board, brow furrowed at the pattern of the tremors when her phone rang. She stepped into the hallway. "Dr. Johnson, we've received a complaint. You're treating a patient without proper oversight. If this goes public, you'll lose your license." She hung up, turned around. Min-ho stood in the doorway. He'd heard enough. "Who reported it?" She didn't answer. "It was my lieutenant." "He thinks you're a liability." "He's right." He walked to the window, jaw tight, the calm mask slipping. "I'm going to fire him, and anyone else who questions you." "No, you're not." He turned. "Because if you do, they'll know I'm the weakness, and they'll use me against you." The room went quiet. He knew she was right, and hating it was written all over his face. What Sarah didn't yet know, what wouldn't surface for another 2 weeks, was that the complaint hadn't come from concern for the empire at all. It had come from the same phone call Jae-hoon made from the window 3 floors below his boss's office. A call meant to create exactly this kind of pressure, exactly this kind of fracture, at exactly the moment it would do the most damage. "So what? I just let them take everything from you. Your license, your career. You let me handle my own life, Min-ho. That's what you do." Her apartment that night, a suitcase open on the bed. "You're leaving." "I have to. The board is investigating. If I stay, I lose everything." Then quit. Come work for me, full time. I'll pay you 10 times what they do. This isn't about money. It's about my life, my career, my future. And what about mine? Silence. If you leave, I won't treat with anyone else. You know that. That's not fair. I don't care about fair. I care about you. She stopped folding, looked at him, really looked at him. I need you to let me go, Min-ho. Not because I want to. Because if I don't do this my way, we'll both lose everything anyway. He didn't argue, didn't threaten again, just nodded once and stepped back from the door like it cost him everything. She finished packing. He was already gone by the time she zipped the last bag shut. 2 nights later, Dr. Han arrived at the Busan safe house unannounced, a location he should not have known existed. Min-ho allowed the visit only after Jae-hoon confirmed Han's credentials had cleared 3 separate checkpoints, credentials Jae-hoon himself had personally vouched for. Sarah caught the flicker of something guarded cross Min-ho's face before he agreed, and understood he wanted to observe the man for himself. Dinner that night was tense in a way Sarah couldn't fully explain. Han was charming, attentive, exactly as warm as she remembered from 6 years of mentorship, complimenting her diagnostic instincts in front of Min-ho, as though presenting her accomplishments for approval. Min-ho said almost nothing through the meal, watching Han with the particular stillness she'd come to recognize as his most dangerous state. What she hadn't expected was Min-ho's shift, the moment Han rested a hand on her shoulder in greeting, brief, familiar, entirely innocent. Min-ho said nothing. The temperature of the room changed anyway. Later, alone on the terrace. You don't like him. I don't know him. That's not what that was. He's touched you twice since he arrived. Once on the shoulder. Once on your arm, showing you his file. Both times you let him. He's my mentor. I know what he is to you. Then what is this? I've built an empire on knowing exactly what belongs to me and what doesn't, he said quietly. I've never once been unsure until now. I'm not something that belongs to anyone. I know. Then stop looking at me like I am. He didn't stop, but he didn't argue either. The revelation came the next morning, buried in a detail she almost missed, a compound listed in Han's personal research archive, left open on a screen while he took a call. A precursor. Not identical to the compound in Min-ho's blood, but close enough that combined with the right catalyst, it would produce exactly the symptoms he'd suffered for weeks. She sat with it for a long moment, listening for footsteps, telling herself there was still an innocent explanation. She almost believed herself until she found the inconsistencies, a date on an old consultation form placing Han near Min-ho's household 8 months before he claimed to have last seen her. Someone had been laying groundwork long before she ever arrived. That night, she finally told Min-ho everything. He listened without interrupting, which frightened her more than any reaction would have. You're certain? No, I'm certain enough to be terrified I might be right. Then we don't move until we have proof he can't explain away. His voice had lost its calm edges. If I'm wrong about him, I destroy the reputation of the only man who ever taught you to save lives. If I'm right. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The confrontation arrived faster than either of them wanted. Han requested a private consultation, insisting he'd found something in the blood work requiring immediate discussion. Min-ho refused to let her go alone, though he agreed to stay out of sight, close enough to hear. Han's office in the guest wing was warm, familiar, exactly the kind of space that had once made her feel safe. You've done extraordinary work, he said. Better than I expected, honestly. I didn't think you'd get this close. Close to what? To understanding what's happening to him. You did this, she said quietly. I did what needed doing." His voice remained kind, patient, the voice he'd used to teach her for years. "Do you understand what that man has cost this country? How many families destroyed to build the empire you've spent weeks trying to save? I'm not a murderer, Sarah. I'm removing a disease before it spreads further." He's a patient, not a diagnosis you get to make on your own. I made a choice most people are too afraid to make. He stood, and for the first time she saw the calculation behind the warmth. "I hoped you wouldn't figure it out until it was finished. I still hope you'll understand eventually that I never wanted to hurt you, only him. Then let me go. I will. Once you understand there's no version of this where you walk out and stop me before tonight." The door didn't open when she reached for it. She didn't scream. She kept him talking, drawing out every detail of how he'd accessed the medication, how long he'd been altering the treatment plan, buying time for the one thing Han hadn't accounted for. Min-ho had been listening the entire time. The door came open from the outside before Han finished his sentence. Min-ho crossed the room in 3 steps, and it wasn't fury that filled his face. It was something colder, quieter, far more frightening. "You trained her," Min-ho said. "You handed her every reason to trust you before you used her to get close to me. I never touched her. You used her anyway." Han's composure cracked. "I did what your enemies were too afraid to attempt. I gave you a slow death instead of a fast one, because I believed you deserved time to understand what you'd done to this country before it ended. That's more mercy than you've ever shown anyone." "Mercy," Min-ho repeated. "You call this mercy?" He didn't raise his voice. 2 of his men were already in the doorway. Han's calm finally gave way to fear. "Kill me, then. Prove every story they tell about you is true." For a long moment, nobody moved. Sarah watched Min-ho's hand tighten at his side, watched the version of him that terrified the entire country rise just beneath the surface. And then, just as quickly, she watched him choose something else. Not mercy exactly. Restraint that cost him more than violence ever would have. "No," he said. "You don't get to die a martyr for what you did to her." He looked at Sarah, not at Han. "You get to live long enough to watch everyone learn the truth about what kind of man you really are." He nodded once. Han was taken from the room without another word. "You could have killed him," she said. "I wanted to. Why didn't you?" "Because you would have watched me do it," he said quietly. "And I didn't want that to be the last thing you knew about me." The relief lasted exactly 1 day. A courier arrived at the Busen house carrying documents Han had hidden as insurance, assuming they'd protect him. Sarah signed for the package, some instinct telling her not to wake Min-ho until she understood what was inside it. Han hadn't acted alone. Someone inside Min-ho's own organization had fed him access, timelines, security schedules, information no outsider could have gathered alone. Min-ho read the name twice before he set the paper down. Park Jae-hoon. The one man he'd trusted without question for over a decade, named in black ink as the source of everything. "It could be a lie," Sarah said. "Han could have planted this to protect himself." "It could be." Min-ho's voice had gone flat, distant. "But you didn't see his face when I said no one else had access to move that easily. He didn't ask who I meant. He already knew." He left the room before she could stop him. What happened next was not the confrontation either of them expected. Jae-hoon didn't run. He came to Min-ho himself, before Min-ho could come for him. And what he brought wasn't a confession of guilt exactly. It was a name Sarah hadn't heard before. A sister who had died 11 years earlier in a warehouse fire during a territory war Min-ho had started and never known the cost of. Jae-hoon had spent a decade protecting the man responsible for it, and 2 years slowly deciding that protection had been a mistake he could no longer live inside. For one terrible night, it looked as though Jae-hoon might turn his gun on himself before Min-ho could decide what to do with him. And it was Sarah, arriving in the doorway with nothing but her voice, who talked him into lowering it. Not because she forgave him, because she understood, better than anyone in that house, what grief did to a person who had no acceptable place to put it down. The final threat came 2 nights after that, not from Jae-hoon, but from the rival syndicate he had unknowingly given a map to. The Yamaguchi-affiliated crew, sensing weakness in a boss who just lost his own lieutenant to scandal, moved on the Busan house directly. Armored cars in the drive before the alarms had finished their first cycle. Sarah found herself in the back of a moving vehicle 20 minutes later, syringe in one hand, bracing herself against the door frame with the other as gunfire cracked somewhere behind them, trying to keep a needle steady in a man's arm, while the car took a corner hard enough to throw them both against the window. "Stay with me," she said, voice flat and clinical even as her hands shook. "Don't you dare seize in a moving car." "Wasn't planning on it," he managed, teeth gritted, and for one absurd second something like a laugh passed between them before the next impact threw it out of reach. They lost the tail 6 minutes later. Neither of them spoke again until the car stopped. In the hours after, the house settled into a silence unlike any Sarah had felt there before, not the tense quiet of suspicion, but something closer to exhaustion finally allowed to rest. Jae-hoon had surrendered himself to exile rather than execution, a mercy that cost Min-ho the loyalty of men who expected blood and gave him instead something closer to peace. The empire he'd built on debts owed and never forgiven had, for one night, chosen a different currency. Sarah found Min-ho on the terrace where jealousy had first shown itself between them, watching water he no longer seemed to see as beautiful so much as steady, unchanging, the one thing in his life that had never once betrayed him. "You saved my life tonight," he said without turning around. "You could have saved yourself. I just made sure you didn't have to become someone you'd hate in the morning." "That's the same thing to me." She crossed the terrace and stood beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "You once told me I wasn't yours," he said quietly. "You were right. I had no claim to make on you. I still don't. Then why does it feel like you're about to try anyway?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face, the first genuine one she'd seen since the night they met. "Because I'm done pretending I don't want to." He turned to face her fully, and this time when his hand rose toward her, there was nothing violent in it, nothing possessive, nothing that echoed the desperate grip of a man mid-seizure grasping for something solid. His fingers brushed her jaw the way they had that very first night, but softer now, asking instead of claiming. "I'm not offering you an empire," he said. "I'm not offering you safety either. I can't promise either one of those things will ever exist for a man like me." "Then what are you offering?" "Everything that's actually mine to give," he said. "Which isn't power. It's just me. Whatever's left of me once the fear and the rumors and the throne get stripped away." "Say it again," she whispered. "The way you meant it the first time, not the way it sounded." He understood immediately. He stepped closer until there was no space left between the man everyone feared and the woman who had refused to fear him from the very beginning. "I'm all yours," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of every ounce of the possessive heat it once held. "Come over here." This time, Sarah didn't pull away. She stepped forward instead, closing the last of the distance herself, and understood in that single motion everything the title of this story had been promising from the very first line. It had never been about ownership. It had never been about control. A man who had spent his entire life making sure nothing could be taken from him had just handed her the only thing he had left to give, freely, with nothing demanded in return. Not possession. Surrender. If this ending hit you the way it hit me writing it, smash that like button, drop a comment telling me which moment wrecked you the most, and subscribe so you never miss the next story that makes you feel exactly this much.